I never thought my hands, trained to dice onions and flip steaks, would one day hold a life together long enough for help to arrive. But that's exactly what happened on a humid Tuesday afternoon in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And it changed everything I thought I knew about courage. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been a cook in the US Army for 11 years. Not a combat medic, not infantry, not special forces, just a cook. The guy who makes sure soldiers get a hot meal before they head out on missions that actually matter. That's how I saw myself anyway. Useful, sure, but never essential, never a hero. The morning started like any other summer day on base. The air was thick and sticky, the kind that makes your uniform cling to your back before you've even started working. I reported to the dining facility at 500 hours, just as the sun began painting the sky in shades of orange and pink over the pine trees that surrounded the base. The kitchen was already warm, the industrial ovens humming their familiar tune, a sound that had become as comforting to me as a mother's lullaby. "Morning, Webb," Sergeant First Class Rodriguez called out as I tied my apron. He was the head cook, a stocky man from San Antonio with a booming laugh and forearms like tree trunks, from years of hauling heavy pots and working industrial mixers. His uniform was always immaculate despite the chaos of kitchen work, and he ran our operation with the precision of a drill sergeant. "We've got 300 for breakfast, another 400 for lunch. Battalions running field exercises all week, so expect them hungry and cranky." "Got it, Sergeant," I replied, pulling out my knives from the leather roll I'd bought with my first paycheck 11 years ago. The blades were worn but sharp, maintained with the same care I'd once watched my grandfather use on his carpentry tools. The rhythm of kitchen work had always been meditative for me. The methodical chopping, the precise timing, the satisfaction of feeding hundreds of hungry soldiers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. The kind of work that let you sleep soundly at night, knowing you'd contributed something tangible to the mission. By 0600, the dining facility was packed with the usual controlled chaos. Young privates fresh out of basic training, their faces still carrying that mixture of enthusiasm and uncertainty, lined up next to hardened NCOs with deployment patches covering their sleeves like battle scars worn with quiet pride. The sound of trays clattering, conversations overlapping about weekend plans and upcoming training, and boots squeaking on the recently mopped linoleum floor created a familiar symphony that I'd grown to appreciate over the years. Some soldiers read newspapers or scrolled through their phones while eating. Others joked with their buddies, and a few just stared into space with that 1,000-yard stare that comes from too little sleep and too much coffee. I served scrambled eggs, bacon, and hash browns with practiced efficiency, my hands moving automatically through motions I'd performed thousands of times. I offered a nod or a brief word to the faces that passed by my station, recognizing regulars and greeting newcomers. "Thanks, Webb," a young specialist said, barely looking up as I loaded his plate with an extra scoop of eggs. He looked exhausted, probably coming off guard duty. "You got it. Get some rest today if you can," I responded, and he managed a tired smile. That was my role. Background noise in the grand machinery of military life. The support personnel that kept everything running but rarely got mentioned in stories or received recognition. And I was okay with that, or at least I thought I was. After breakfast service ended around 800, Rodriguez assigned me to prep work for lunch. We were planning meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, comfort food that soldiers always appreciated after a morning of hard training. I moved to the back prep area, a smaller room lined with stainless steel counters that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting and industrial refrigerators that hummed constantly. The morning heat was already intensifying, despite the air conditioning system that struggled to keep up with the heat from the ovens and grills. Even with the exhaust fans running full blast, sweat dripped down my temples as I worked through 50 pounds of potatoes that needed peeling and cubing. The work was monotonous but familiar. I'd fallen into a rhythm, my mind wandering to plans for the weekend. Maybe catch a movie off base, call my parents in Ohio, work on the old motorcycle I'd been restoring in my spare time. Normal thoughts for a normal day. Around 10:30 hours, I heard a commotion from the main kitchen. Raised voices, someone shouting over the usual clanging and sizzling. At first, I figured it was just the usual chaos. Maybe someone dropped a tray of food, or the grill wasn't heating properly, problems we dealt with daily. But then I heard Rodriguez yell my name with an urgency I'd never heard from him before, not even during our deployment to Kuwait, where we'd served meals in 120-degree heat. "Webb, get out here now!" The tone made my blood run cold. I dropped my peeler, potatoes scattering across the counter, and rushed through the doorway. What I saw made my stomach drop, and my training instincts kick in before my mind could fully process the scene. One of our younger cooks, Private First Class Danny Morrison, was on the floor near the prep station, convulsing violently. His face was bright red, almost purple, veins bulging in his neck like ropes under his skin, and his hands clawed desperately at his throat in that universal gesture of choking. 3 other kitchen staff stood frozen around him, their faces pale with panic, their hands raised helplessly like they wanted to help but didn't know how. Someone had dropped a tray, and food was scattered across the floor, forgotten in the crisis. "He's choking!" Rodriguez shouted, dropping to his knees beside Morrison with a heavy thud. "Someone call 911, now!" Private Jenkins, a young woman who'd only been with us for 2 months, fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, while another cook stood paralyzed, tears already streaming down her face. Everything seemed to move in slow motion, and at lightning speed simultaneously, that strange time distortion that happens in moments of extreme crisis. I watched Rodriguez attempt the Heimlich maneuver, his thick, powerful arms wrapping around Morrison's torso from behind, lifting the younger man, and performing the upward thrusts we'd all been taught. But the private was already losing consciousness, his movements becoming weaker with each passing second, his struggles less coordinated as his brain began to starve for oxygen. "It's not working!" one of the other cooks screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Oh God, it's not working!" Morrison's eyes were rolling back, showing mostly white. His lips had gone from red to blue in what seemed like seconds. His body was beginning to go limp in Rodriguez's arms. That's when something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the countless hours of mandatory first aid training we'd all sat through over the years, usually in stuffy classrooms where we practiced on dummies and joked about never needing these skills. Maybe it was the muscle memory from the CPR certification I'd renewed just last month. Maybe it was pure instinct, some primal human drive to save another life. But suddenly, I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just moving, my body responding to training I didn't even know I'd internalized. I pushed forward, shouldering past the frozen onlookers, dropping to my knees beside Morrison hard enough that I'd find bruises there later. His lips were turning a deeper shade of blue now, almost purple. His eyes were rolling back further. His chest was still trying to pull in air that wouldn't come, creating a horrible whistling sound. He had maybe seconds left before permanent brain damage set in, maybe 30 seconds before death. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow, but instead of paralyzing me, it focused me with laser precision. "Turn him on his side," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when inside I was screaming with fear. Rodriguez helped me roll Morrison onto his side, and I could see his chest still trying desperately to pull in air, his diaphragm working overtime but accomplishing nothing. His whole body was trembling now, going into shock. My hands moved on their own, guided by training and instinct. I'd performed the Heimlich maneuver on a dummy during training, but this was different. This was a real person dying in front of me, a 23-year-old kid from Tennessee who'd shown me pictures of his daughter just yesterday, who'd talked excitedly about his plans to surprise his wife with her anniversary dinner next week. I positioned myself behind him, wrapped my arms around his torso, found the right spot just above his navel, fist placed correctly, other hand covering it, and pulled upward with everything I had. Nothing happened. Morrison's body was going limp now, his face a disturbing shade of purple that would haunt my dreams for weeks. The whistling sound from his throat had stopped, which was somehow worse than hearing it. "Come on, Danny," I whispered, repositioning my hands, making sure my fist was in exactly the right spot. I tried again, harder this time, pulling upward and inward with all my strength, feeling his ribs flex under the pressure, praying I wasn't causing more damage than I was preventing. Still nothing. My heart hammered against my chest so hard I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Someone behind me was crying, making a horrible keening sound. Rodriguez's hand gripped my shoulder. Whether to steady me or himself, I couldn't tell. I could hear sirens in the distance. The medics were coming, but they wouldn't arrive in time. This was on me. Right now, I was the only thing standing between Danny Morrison and death. "Don't you dare die," I growled at him, though he probably couldn't hear me anymore. I adjusted my position one more time, planted my fist in the right spot with renewed determination, and pulled upward with every ounce of strength I possessed, using my legs for leverage, putting my entire body weight into the motion. This time I felt something shift inside his chest. Morrison's body jerked violently, and suddenly a chunk of partially chewed sausage, slick with saliva and blood, flew from his mouth, skittering across the tile floor and leaving a trail of mucus behind it. For one terrible, eternal moment, nothing happened. Morrison's body was completely still. No breathing, no movement, no response. I thought I'd been too late, that I'd failed, that this young father would never see his daughter grow up because I hadn't acted fast enough. Then Morrison sucked in a massive, rattling breath that sounded like the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. His whole body shuddered violently as oxygen flooded back into his starving lungs. He coughed, deep, racking coughs that shook his entire frame, gasping and sputtering, but he was breathing. Air was moving. He was alive. "Oh my God!" Someone sobbed behind me, the words barely coherent through their tears. "Oh my God! He's breathing!" I sat back on my heels, my hands shaking so badly I had to press them against the floor to steady myself. The adrenaline that had carried me through the crisis was beginning to fade, leaving me feeling hollow and strange, like I was watching everything from outside my own body. Rodriguez was already on his radio, his voice professional despite the tremor I could detect underneath, updating the emergency response team that was en route. Morrison continued to cough violently, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the saliva and blood on his lips as he gulped air like a drowning man who'd just broken the surface after being underwater too long. "You're okay," I told him, my voice cracking and breaking on the words. I placed a hand on his shoulder, partly to comfort him and partly to anchor myself to reality. "You're going to be okay, Danny. Just keep breathing. That's it. Just breathe." He couldn't respond with words, but his hand found mine and gripped it with surprising strength, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a spinning world. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity and emotion. The medics arrived, bursting through the kitchen doors with their equipment and taking over with professional efficiency, checking Morrison's vitals, getting him on oxygen through a mask that covered half his face, asking him questions to check his cognitive function. They prepared him for transport to the base hospital as a precaution, loading him onto a gurney while he continued to grip my hand. Rodriguez cleared the kitchen except for essential personnel, his voice sharp and commanding, getting everyone back to work or sending them outside to collect themselves. I stood in the corner, watching it all unfold, feeling strangely detached from my own body, like I was watching a movie instead of participating in real life. One of the medics, a staff sergeant with kind eyes and graying temples that suggested he'd seen his share of emergencies, approached me as they were wheeling Morrison toward the exit. "You saved his life," he said simply, his tone matter-of-fact but respectful. That was textbook Heimlich. Another 30 seconds and we'd be looking at permanent brain damage or worse. "You did good, soldier." I nodded, unable to form words. My throat felt tight, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or cry or both. After they left, the kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of the exhaust fans. Rodriguez put his hand on my shoulder again, and I realized I was still standing in the same spot, staring at the doors Morrison had been wheeled through. "Take 15, Webb. Get some air. That's an order." I walked out the back door of the dining facility into the oppressive North Carolina heat. The sun was directly overhead now, beating down mercilessly on the pavement, creating waves of heat that distorted the air. Despite the temperature, I felt cold, like my body couldn't quite regulate itself anymore. I found a spot in the shade of the building and leaned against the brick wall, the rough surface grounding me to reality, then slowly slid down until I was sitting on the ground with my knees drawn up. My hands were still shaking. I stared at them, these ordinary hands that had just pulled someone back from death's door. They looked the same as they had that morning when I'd tied my apron. A small scar on my left thumb from a knife slip 2 years ago during a particularly hectic dinner service. Calluses from years of gripping pot handles and spatulas, short clean nails that I kept trimmed for food safety. Nothing special. Nothing that suggested heroism or courage or any of the qualities we associated with the soldiers who earned medals and commendations, but they'd been enough. When it mattered most, they'd been exactly what was needed. I don't know how long I sat there, watching soldiers go about their daily routines across the base, everyone unaware that someone had almost died this morning. Eventually, Rodriguez came out with 2 bottles of water, the plastic cold enough to create condensation that dripped onto my uniform when he handed it to me. He sat down beside me without a word, his bulk settling onto the ground with a grunt. We drank in silence, watching a formation of soldiers jogging past in the distance, their cadence calls carrying faintly across the base on the humid air. I froze. Rodriguez finally said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual confidence. "I've been in this army for 19 years, deployed 3 times to Iraq and Afghanistan, seen things that would give most people nightmares, and I froze when it really mattered. I tried the Heimlich, but I was panicking, not thinking clearly. You didn't freeze, you stayed calm." "I don't know what happened," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just moved. It was like someone else was controlling my body." "That's what heroes do, Webb. They move when everyone else freezes. They act when action is needed, not because they're fearless, but because they refuse to let fear stop them." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the label. "I'm not a hero. I'm a cook. I make eggs and bacon. I prep vegetables. That's what I do." Rodriguez looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before directed at me. Respect, maybe, or recognition. An acknowledgement that I was more than just one of his cooks. "You're a soldier who saved a life today. You're a soldier who kept his head when others couldn't. Don't diminish that. Don't brush it off like it's nothing. What you did in there, that matters. That kid gets to go home to his family because of you." The words settled over me, and I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just nodded and took another drink of water, letting the cold liquid ground me in the present moment. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. Word spread fast on a military base, through text messages, conversations at lunch, whispers in formation. Gossip traveled at the speed of light here. By lunch service, it seemed like everyone knew what had happened. Soldiers I'd never spoken to before nodded at me as they passed through the line. Some clapped me on the shoulder or shook my hand. A few said thank you, though for what specifically I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe just for being the kind of person who acted instead of froze. Captain Hendricks, our company commander, pulled me aside after lunch service when the chaos had died down. He was a tall, lean man with close-cropped grey hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever facade you might try to present. He'd served in special forces before transitioning to his current position, and everyone respected him. "Specialist Webb," he said, and I automatically snapped to attention, my heels clicking together. "At ease. I want to talk to you about what happened this morning." "Yes, sir." I relaxed slightly but maintained proper posture. "You showed quick thinking and courage under pressure today. That's the kind of character we value in this army, regardless of your MOS. I'm putting you in for a commendation. The paperwork will be processed, and you'll receive formal recognition for your actions." I swallowed hard, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. "Sir, I just did what needed to be done. Anyone would have done the same." "That's where you're wrong." He studied me for a moment, his gaze intense. "Most people freeze in crisis situations. It's human nature, but you didn't. That says something about your character. Now tell me, how long have you been thinking you're just a cook, Webb?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Sir, you wear that uniform same as everyone else on this base. You took the same oath I did when I enlisted. Just because you don't carry a rifle downrange doesn't mean you're not a soldier. Today you proved that beyond any doubt. Don't forget it." "Yes, sir." I managed, my voice tight with emotion I was trying to suppress. He nodded, satisfied. "Carry on, Specialist. And Webb, be proud of what you did today. I know I'm proud to have you in my company." That evening, after my shift ended, and I'd showered and changed into civilian clothes, I visited Morrison in the base hospital. The building was modern and clean, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. I found his room on the 2nd floor. He was sitting up in bed, looking exhausted but very much alive, his color restored to normal. An IV line ran into his arm, and monitors beeped softly in the background. His wife was there, a petite blonde woman with red-rimmed eyes, who stood up when I entered, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're Marcus," she said. It wasn't a question. Morrison had obviously told her about me. "Yes, ma'am." She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and hugged me fiercely. I stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do with my hands, as she sobbed into my shoulder, her whole body shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, the words broken by tears. "Thank you for giving me my husband back, for giving our daughter her father. I don't know how to. Thank you." When she finally released me, stepping back and wiping her eyes with tissues that Morrison handed her from the bedside table, I saw Morrison watching us, tears streaming down his face too, making no effort to hide them. "Webb," he said hoarsely, his voice still rough from the trauma to his throat. "I don't know how to—" "You don't have to say anything," I interrupted, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I'm just glad you're okay. That's all that matters. No, I need to say this." He struggled to sit up straighter, and his wife helped adjust his pillows. "I've got a 3-year-old daughter named Emma. She's got blonde curls like her mum and this laugh that sounds like bells. She was supposed to have a tea party with me this weekend. She's been planning it for days, picking out which stuffed animals get to attend and everything. Because of you, I get to be there for that. Because of you, I get to watch her grow up. I get to walk her down the aisle someday. I get to meet my grandkids. Do you understand what you gave me today? The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just saved a soldier. I'd saved a father, a husband, a son, a friend. The ripple effects of those few minutes in the kitchen would extend through decades, touching lives I'd never meet. I pulled up a chair and sat down, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day crash over me like a wave I'd been holding back. I'm glad I was there, I said quietly, my voice barely steady. I'm glad I didn't freeze. I'm glad I remembered my training when it mattered. We talked for a while, about nothing important really. Morrison told me about Emma's tea party plans in elaborate detail, how she insisted on using the fancy cups his mother-in-law had given them. His wife showed me pictures on her phone of their daughter, and I made appropriate comments about how cute she was, how she had her father's smile. I told them about my plans to visit my parents in Ohio next month, about the motorcycle I was restoring. We joked about the terrible hospital coffee that Morrison's wife kept trying to drink. Normal things, mundane conversations, but underneath it all was this unspoken understanding, this bond that had been forged in those desperate moments on the kitchen floor. We were connected now in a way that was difficult to articulate. I'd held his life in my hands, and he knew it, and we both knew that neither of us would ever forget it. When I finally left the hospital, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Long shadows stretched across the base, and the evening air was finally cooling down, bringing relief from the oppressive heat. I walked back to my barracks slowly, taking in the familiar sights of the base with new eyes. The motor pool with its rows of vehicles that were probably heading out for night exercises. The PT field where soldiers were still running sprints, pushing their bodies to the limit. The chapel with its simple white steeple that served soldiers of all faiths. This was my world, these were my people, and today I'd saved one of them. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal. The initial excitement faded as new events and gossip took over the base rumor mill. People stopped congratulating me, though some still nodded with a new respect when they passed. Morrison recovered fully and returned to duty, though we both noticed he chewed his food more carefully now. I went back to my routine, so 500 wake-up, kitchen prep, serving meals, clean-up, repeat. The same rhythm I'd followed for 11 years. But something had changed inside me, a fundamental shift in how I saw myself and my role in the army. I noticed it in small ways. The care I took in preparing each meal, knowing that food was fuel for soldiers who might need every ounce of energy for their jobs, whether training or combat. The attention I paid during mandatory training exercises, actually listening and practicing instead of just going through the motions to check a box. The way I looked at my fellow soldiers, not as faces in a lunch line or names on a roster, but as people with families and dreams and lives that mattered, people who depended on me in ways I'd never fully appreciated before. About a month after the incident, Captain Hendricks called me into his office. The company headquarters building was quieter than usual, most soldiers already gone for the day. He handed me a certificate in a blue folder, an Army Commendation Medal for life-saving actions and devotion to duty. The language was formal and military, but the meaning was clear. "Congratulations, Specialist Webb," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You earned this." I stared at the certificate, at my name printed in official military font, at the seal and signatures that made it official. Marcus Webb, cook, hero. "Thank you, sir." "How do you feel?" he asked, leaning back against his desk. I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Proud, certainly. Humbled, definitely. But there was something else, too. A quiet confidence I hadn't possessed before. A deeper understanding of my own capabilities. An understanding that heroism wasn't about carrying a rifle or storming a battlefield, or doing anything that would make good footage for a recruitment commercial. It was about being ready when the moment demanded it. About acting when others couldn't. About doing what needed to be done regardless of your job title or how important you thought you were. "I feel like a soldier, sir," I finally answered. "A real soldier, not just a guy who cooks." Hendricks smiled, and there was approval in his expression. "Good answer, because that's exactly what you are. Remember that." That evening, I called my parents from my room. My dad, a retired factory worker who'd never served in the military but respected those who did, picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad," I said, settling onto my bunk. "Marcus, good to hear from you, son. How's the army treating you?" His voice carried the warmth that only a father's voice could, the familiarity of someone who'd known you your entire life. I paused, thinking about everything that had happened, the fear that had gripped me when I saw Morrison on the floor, the adrenaline that had surged through my veins as I performed the Heimlich, the terrible moment when I thought I'd failed, the joy when he finally breathed, the weight of his wife's gratitude, and the medal I'd received that morning. "Good, Dad. It's treating me good. Still cooking?" There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. "Yeah, still cooking." I looked at my hands, at the calluses and scars that marked years of kitchen work. "That's honest work, son. Always has been. I'm proud of you for sticking with it." "Thanks, Dad." I hesitated, then added, "I'm proud of me, too." We talked for a while longer about mundane things, Mom's garden and the tomatoes that were coming in, my sister Sarah's new job at the elementary school, the heat wave that was hitting Ohio, predictions for the brown season. I didn't tell them about Morrison. I didn't mention the medal or the commendation ceremony that would happen next month. Some things felt too big for words, too personal to share over a phone line, too meaningful to reduce to a simple story. Maybe someday I'd tell them, maybe not. That night, lying in my rack and listening to the sounds of the barracks, snoring from the next room, someone's music playing softly, the air conditioner cycling on and off, I thought about the title some journalist might give this story if they ever heard about it, "The Day a Cook Became a Hero." But that wasn't quite right. The truth was more nuanced, more complex. I hadn't become a hero that day. I'd simply discovered that I already was one, that everyone in uniform, from the newest private to the most senior general, had the potential to be one when circumstances demanded it. Heroism wasn't a transformation, it was a revelation. It was discovering that the courage and capability had been there all along, waiting for the moment when it was needed. The next morning, I reported to the dining facility at 500 hours, just like always. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange. Rodriguez was already there, prepping the coffee station with his usual efficiency, the smell of fresh coffee beginning to fill the air. "Morning, Webb," he called out, not looking up from his work. "Morning, Sergeant," I replied, tying my apron with practiced motions. 300 for breakfast, 500 for lunch. Battalion's got field exercises all week again. Got it. I pulled out my knives from their roll and got to work. The rhythm was the same as always. The methodical chopping, the precise timing, the satisfaction of feeding hungry soldiers who depended on us. But I wasn't the same. I carried myself differently now, stood a little straighter, moved with purpose instead of just routine, made eye contact instead of keeping my head down. Because I understood now what Captain Hendricks had been trying to tell me. It wasn't about the job you did in the army, but about the person you were when it mattered most. Your MOS was just a label, a role assigned to you by the needs of the service. But your character, that was something you carried with you always, regardless of whether you were cooking eggs or conducting raids or doing any of the 1,000 other jobs that kept the army functioning. And when my moment had come, when I was called upon to be more than just a cook, I'd been ready. My hands had known what to do. My training had kicked in. My courage hadn't failed me. The soldiers started filing in at 600, same as always. Young privates with sleep still in their eyes. Hardened NCOs with coffee mugs already in hand. Officers rushing to early meetings, checking their phones between bites. I served them eggs and bacon and hash browns, offering a nod or a brief word as they passed through the line. "Thanks, Webb," a young specialist said, holding out his tray. "You got it," I responded, loading his plate with care. But this time I looked up. I met his eyes. I recognized him as a soldier, a fellow member of this military family, someone whose life had value and meaning beyond their uniform or their rank or their job. Someone who might need help someday, and I wanted to be ready if that day came. And he nodded back, a simple gesture of mutual respect that meant more than any medal or certificate ever could. That's the day I truly became a soldier. Not the day I enlisted 12 years ago with dreams of serving my country. Not the day I graduated basic training, young and naive and thinking I understood what military service meant. But the day I saved Private First Class Danny Morrison's life in a hot kitchen in Fort Bragg and realized that courage doesn't come from your job description or your training or your equipment. It comes from your willingness to act when action is needed, your refusal to freeze when others depend on you. People have asked me to tell the story since then, curious about the details. wanting to hear about the drama and the life-saving. I usually deflect, changing the subject or giving brief answers that don't satisfy their curiosity, not because I'm modest or because I think what I did wasn't important. I deflect because the story feels incomplete somehow, because words can't really capture those few minutes when time seemed to both freeze and accelerate. The real story isn't about those few desperate minutes on the kitchen floor, gripping Morrison's body and trying to force air into his lungs. It's about every morning I've shown up since then with renewed purpose, knowing that what I do matters. It's about understanding that every soldier, regardless of their role or rank, has the capacity for heroism. It's about learning that you don't need to be on the front lines or in combat or doing anything that looks dramatic to make a real difference in someone's life. Sometimes heroism is quiet. Sometimes it happens in a kitchen while you're supposed to be prepping potatoes. Sometimes it's performed by hands that are more familiar with spatulas than weapons. Sometimes the heroes wear aprons instead of body armor. And sometimes the heroes don't talk about it much afterward because they understand that what they did wasn't extraordinary in the sense of being beyond normal human capability. It was simply what any soldier would do when called upon, what any good person would do when someone's life hung in the balance. But I'll never forget certain details. The weight of Morrison's body in my arms, growing heavier as he lost consciousness, the terrible blue color of his lips that still appears in my dreams sometimes, the feeling of his ribs flexing under the pressure of my hands, the moment that piece of sausage finally dislodged and air rushed back into his lungs with that beautiful, terrible gasping sound, his wife's grateful tears soaking into my shoulder, the tea party with his daughter that almost didn't happen. Rodriguez's words that I replay when I doubt myself. That's what heroes do. They move when everyone else freezes. I'm still just a cook. I still report at 500 hours every morning, still serve hundreds of meals every day, still do the unglamorous work that keeps an army running, but rarely gets mentioned in speeches or ceremonies. My hands still dice onions and flip steaks and prep vegetables. My uniform still gets stained with grease and food. I still go home smelling like whatever we served for dinner. But I know now that just a cook is enough, more than enough, because when it mattered, when a life hung in the balance, these ordinary hands were capable of extraordinary things. These hands that had spent 11 years cooking were also capable of saving lives when called upon, and that's a truth I carry with me every single day, a truth that has changed how I see myself and my service. I'm not just background noise anymore. I'm not just the guy who makes sure people get fed. I'm a soldier who was ready when my moment came. I'm someone who didn't freeze when others needed me. That's the real story. Not about one dramatic moment, but about understanding that every moment has the potential to be that moment, that every day you wear the uniform is a chance to serve in ways you might never anticipate. Heroism isn't about planning or preparation or waiting for your chance to do something memorable. It's about being ready for whatever comes, about maintaining your skills and your awareness so that when crisis strikes, you can respond. And if that's not worth getting up at 500 for, I don't know what is.